Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. This is the weekly update for Thursday, August 21st, 2025. Today is day 685 since October 7th of 2023. So major updates from the past week, starting with Gaza. Attacks near Gaza City have begun. Reservists are being called up into the Israeli Defense Forces to serve as the Israeli military has prepared for the occupation of the north of Gaza, specifically Gaza City. Last Friday, a week ago, Israel's Security Cabinet approved that plan for the IDF to enter and take over Gaza City. The Israeli military has begun this past week to mobilize. They're preparing and have already begun. This takeover would displace between 600 and 800,000 Palestinians from the north of the enclave. Netanyahu has said that the plan focuses on 5 major principles or points, some of which contradict the multilateral attempts and conversations for a comprehensive permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Those 5 points are: first, disarming Hamas; second, the return of all hostages, dead or alive; third, the demilitarization of the entire Gaza Strip; fourth, Israel's, quote, security control over the Gaza Strip; and 5, a new government in Gaza that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. The deadline for the first phase of the newly approved Israeli operation that includes the evacuation of Gaza City and the expansion of aid distribution was previously said to be on October 7th of 2025, which would be the 2-year anniversary from the Hamas attacks. North Gaza and Gaza City have borne the brunt of artificial humanitarian crisis that has engulfed the Strip. Food, water, medical supplies have been deliberately restricted. There are large swaths of the population that are already facing the conditions of famine. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war, a violation of fundamental moral principles and international humanitarian law. And humanitarian law is unequivocal. The occupation of Gaza would be illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention. The occupying power bears an obligation to protect civilians, to ensure access to food and medical care, to refrain from collective punishment. Nothing in Netanyahu's proposed course of action indicates such obligations might be able to be met. On the contrary, every indication is that this takeover would only prolong displacement, hunger, and death on a massive scale. Inside the government of Israel, there's significant resistance to the takeover plan, not only from the head of the IDF, who has since acquiesced, but the National Security Advisor Hanegbi, who's a close confidant to Netanyahu, has opposed the plan to expand military operations in Gaza. He said so at the Security Cabinet meeting. Even conservative Jewish groups that are very pro-Israel in the United States, Jewish groups such as the American Jewish Committee, the AJC, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, have warned that an Israeli takeover of Gaza would endanger hostages and innocent Palestinians. Nonetheless, the chief of staff of the IDF, Eyal Zamir, has fully mobilized and said that he is prepared for an expanded operation in Gaza after the Security Cabinet gave their green light. Yesterday, on Wednesday, there were 56 Palestinians killed in the enclave, 185 wounded. That was over a 24-hour period of time. An additional, of those 185 wounded, 22 of them were aid seekers, it was reported yesterday. The ministry also reported that there were 3 hunger-related deaths that happened in the previous 24 hours, bringing the number of deaths related to malnutrition to 262 people. That includes 112 children. As of yesterday, the numbers reported in terms of the total death toll are 62,122 people, again believed to be a vast underestimate of the number of deaths. That includes 10,576 Palestinians who were killed since Israel broke their most recent ceasefire in March. The number of fatalities among those who have sought humanitarian assistance has now reached more than 2,018 people. Also, yesterday, on Wednesday, the Israeli military announced that they're calling up tens of thousands of reservists, 60,000 reservists, and they will, in addition, lengthen the service of 20,000 people who are currently serving as reservists in preparation for the expanded military operations in Gaza. The defense minister of Israel, Katz, approved the plans for the new phase of operations. And they have said that the military is expected to start operations in additional parts of Gaza City in the coming days. On Monday of this past week, there were at least 60 people killed by Israeli fire in the Gaza Strip. 27 of them were seeking aid. 344 were wounded by Israeli fire during those 24 hours. Also, 5 people during that time period died of hunger and malnutrition. 2 of the 5 were children. Israel is not letting humanitarian supplies into Gaza in quantities sufficient to avert widespread starvation, the Human Rights Office of the United Nations said on Tuesday of this past week. And the Red Cross has warned that the transfer plans of Palestinians to the south of Gaza will worsen an already catastrophic situation. The civilian population in Gaza is living in abhorrent conditions. More than 80% of the people in the Gaza Strip have already been impacted by evacuation orders. It's unimaginable that citizens or civilians would be compelled to move to an even smaller area while they're suffering the effects of limited access to clean water and food and necessary humanitarian supplies. Additionally, a large-scale evacuation would create additional risk for civilians given the prevailing conditions on the ground. That also includes the daily bombardment by the Israeli military. On Monday, multiple reports indicated that IDF tanks have entered the Al Sabra neighborhood, which is in central Gaza City. This indicates that the IDF assault has begun. Also on Monday, Netanyahu visited the IDF's Gaza division and said that Hamas is under atomic pressure, signaling that Israel is prepared to escalate their operations to secure the release of hostages. This was with IDF Chief Zamir approving operational plans for the takeover of Gaza City this past Sunday. On Monday, Gaza City braced as families flee ahead of the potential Israeli assault. Some Palestinians have moved west or south ahead of the possible offensive. The area is under near constant bombardment. Israel's plan to seize Gaza City has sparked alarm, as I mentioned, not only within Israel, but internationally as well. Tens of thousands of Israelis have protested for a ceasefire and the release of the remaining 50 hostages held by Palestinian militants. It's worth noting that Egypt has said if Gaza City is taken over, that would provoke or prompt the assassination of the remaining hostages who are alive. Saturday, it was reported that 11 Palestinians died of starvation. Of those 11, one of them was a child. The ministry said that the number of Palestinians who had died of hunger at that point had risen to 251 people, including 108 children. Humanitarian assistance must be allowed into Gaza. More than 100 aid and advocacy organizations, including Save the Children, Oxfam, and our organization, Churches for Middle East Peace, called for an end to the weaponization of aid. We call on all international states and donors to press Israel to end the weaponization of aid, including the bureaucratic obstructions such as NGO registration procedures. We insist that international NGOs are not forced to share sensitive information about their staff, a violation of the General Data Protection Regulation, or compromise staff safety or independence as a condition for delivering aid. And we demand the immediate and unconditional opening of all of the land crossings and conditions for the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance. According to data taken by the United Nations, only 1.5% of cropland is accessible and suitable for cultivation for Palestinians because of Israel's destruction of Gaza. And the health ministry on Friday said that 51 people were killed in the 24 hours preceding, including 17 who were waiting for humanitarian assistance. One child died during that time period from malnutrition. 127 food aid packages were airdropped into Gaza on Friday. This was a part of a cooperation between Israel, the UAE, Jordan, Germany, Belgium, France, Italy, and Singapore, according to the IDF. And the Israeli troops sealed a tunnel that spanned approximately 4 miles in Beit Hanun in northern Gaza, it was reported. The UN, Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation, and the IDF must work together to provide aid to Gaza's population. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, this was under the Biden administration, Jack Lew, and also President Biden's Special Envoy for the Middle East Humanitarian Affairs, David Satterfield, said this in an article that was published in Foreign Affairs magazine. In addition, over 100 organizations signed a joint letter that included Churches for Middle East Peace, calling on Israel to halt the weaponization of aid in Gaza. The letter talks about how Israel has threatened to ban major aid organizations as starvation has deepened. In terms of ceasefire negotiations, it was announced earlier this week that Hamas accepted a new Gaza ceasefire proposal. This was put forward by Qatar and Egypt. Two diplomats and an Egyptian official reported this. We've yet to hear whether or not Israel has accepted those terms. This was very similar to a previous agreement that Israel had agreed to, but that was in past weeks. The plan calls for the IDF withdrawal of 1,000 meters from northern and eastern Gaza. This excludes Shujaiya and Beit Lahia and includes a prisoner exchange with 10 living hostages to be returned in exchange for 140 Palestinians who are serving life sentences and 60 additional Palestinians who are serving for over 15 years. Under the proposal, the Rafah crossing with Egypt would be reopened in both directions, and an agreement on the exchange of remains stipulates that for each deceased Israeli, 10 Palestinian bodies would also be released. Israel is considering Hamas's response to the proposal, which would include a 60-day ceasefire agreement, and again, half of the release of hostages that are currently held in Gaza. In the occupied West Bank, Israel gave final approval for a controversial settlement project in the E1 area yesterday. This would essentially bisect the West Bank, a move to skew the borders of a possible Palestinian state. Effectively, it would cut the occupied Palestinian West Bank into two. Commenting on the approval, Israel's far-right minister Smotrich said that Palestinian state is being erased from the table, not with slogans, but with actions. We should heed his words, for he's not wrong. The U.S. does not oppose the Israeli government's plan to approve massive settlement construction in E1. That's according to U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. He told Israel's Army radio that this past week. And over the weekend, it was reported Israel on social media and in Israeli news that Smotrich revealed plans to confiscate thousands of dunams of Palestinian land while investing billions to settle an additional 1 million Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Also, over the weekend, settlers reportedly attacked 2 Palestinian villages in the West Bank. Overnight into Friday, the village of Susia in the West Bank, clubs and stones were used, according to local reports. The attackers fled the scene before Israeli forces arrived. In the night's second reported attack, settlers were said to hurl Molotov cocktails at a Palestinian village. In Israel, hundreds of ultra-Orthodox anti-IDF draft protesters blocked major central Israeli roads and across other parts of Israel yesterday over the Israeli army's arrest operation against ultra-Orthodox who have dodged the draft. The Committee to Save the Torah World, a hardline faction staunchly against enlistment in the IDF, said that the Sons clarify today, you declared a war on the students of the Torah, and so a war you shall receive. On Highway 2, the road that links Tel Aviv to Haifa, also known as the Coastal Highway, clashes erupted between protesters and drivers. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis over the weekend participated in some of the largest anti-war protests in months, organized by a group that represents families of Israeli hostages. While protests are ongoing, the chief of staff of the IDF, Samir, and senior military commanders in Gaza approved the plan for the next phase of the war. That includes the capturing of Gaza City. The Hostage and Missing Families Forum announced a nationwide Israel Stops Again protest for next Sunday. They're calling attention to the 50 hostages who still remain in Gaza. They also, family of the hostages, have urged President Trump to act, sending him a letter saying that the world desperately needs leaders like you. In a press release from the Hostages and Missing Family Forums, the families of 50 hostages held in Gaza issued this letter, calling on President Trump to seize the opportunity to end the war in Gaza and to secure the release of their loved ones. Very controversially, also in Israel, Ben Gvir was filmed visiting the cell of the Palestinian convict Barghouti, who's considered by many to be somewhat of a Martin Luther King Jr. figure, arrested after the Second Palestinian Intifada. Israelis consider him a terrorist. Palestinians consider him a freedom fighter. In Egypt, displacing Palestinians from Gaza has been declared a red line once again. Egyptian Foreign Minister Abdel-Hadi told CNN, adding that Cairo will not accept it, participate in it, nor allow it to happen. In Lebanon, the government has said they have done their part in endorsing the U.S.-backed plan for Hezbollah to disarm. They said what we need is for Israel to comply with an equal handshake. U.S. Special Envoy Tom Barak said yesterday, following months of trilateral shuttle diplomacy aimed at ending the Lebanon-Israel hostilities. On Monday, 3 people were injured in an Israeli drone strike in the south of Lebanon. According to reports, all 3 that were wounded were Syrian workers. The IDF also attacked a military structure and an underground infrastructure. They say that it's at a Hezbollah site in which military activities were identified in South Lebanon this past week. And the Lebanese prime minister accused the Hezbollah chief of threatening to start a civil war. Prime Minister Salam accused Hezbollah Secretary Chief General Naim Qassem of threatening to start a civil war, saying there's no one in Lebanon today who wants a civil war, and the threats or hints of this are completely unacceptable. Hezbollah Secretary General Qassem said the group will not allow the Lebanese government to disarm it, and he warned there will be no life in Lebanon if there are moves taken against Hezbollah. Related to Iran, Reuters reported this past week that Iran says the moment for effective nuclear talks has not yet come. They said that this was Iran's top diplomat saying in remarks carried by the state media on Wednesday that the time for conversations to be effective has not yet been reached. A few updates related to Syria. Yesterday, on Wednesday, the Foreign Ministry held a rare direct meeting with an Israeli delegation in Paris. The U.S. brokered talks to help Syria and Israel to normalize relations, according to a Trump administration official. And Syria's former Assad regime forced the disappearance of hundreds of children, conspiring with ministers and governors to place those children as political prisoners in orphanages. The regime sent children to at least 9 different care centers, 6 of which are a part of the SOS Children's Villages International, according to documents and interviews from the New York Times. Hundreds of people have demonstrated in Saweda in the south of Syria. This is in support of the Druze minority group there who are seeking self-determination. According to activist media, the protests were the largest since last month's deadly clashes in that area. A couple of international responses. French President Macron has warned that Israel's new plans for the Gaza offensive will bring a complete disaster, drag the region into permanent war. Macron said Wednesday that he spoke with Middle Eastern leaders and that they've agreed that Israel's plan for the takeover of Gaza will be a complete disaster for both people and would drag the region into permanent war. A group of between 30 and 50 critically ill and injured Palestinian children will travel to the UK for medical treatment from Gaza in coming weeks, all the while as the United States is re-evaluating their plan to allow patients from Gaza into the United States. Other updates from the U.S., Democratic senators have accused Israel of silencing the voices of Gazan journalists, and they are urging President Trump to take action. This is actually led by 17 Democratic senators, the leader of whom is Jewish Senator Brian Schatz, having written to President Trump about the killing of journalists in Gaza and urging increased access and protection. This was specifically in response to the well-known Al Jazeera journalist who was killed, Anas al-Sharif, in addition to 6 other journalists, just one of the examples of many where journalists have been attacked in Gaza. It's a part of a pattern of violence that has silenced the voices of far too many Gazan journalists, the senators wrote. Israel has not provided convincing evidence that its claim that al-Sharif was a Hamas militant. Absent a compelling explanation of the military objective for the attack, it appears Israel is publicly admitting to targeting and killing journalists who have shown the world the scale of the suffering in Gaza, which would be a violation of international law. The U.S. must make clear to Israel that banning and censoring media organizations and targeting or threatening members of the press is unacceptable and must stop. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department has sanctioned ICC judges over the prosecution specifically of Netanyahu. Marco Rubio announced that the U.S. is imposing sanctions on 4 officials of the ICC, to which Netanyahu welcomed the news, saying that the action supports truth and justice. This week, 50% of Americans, the majority of Americans, think every country should recognize Palestine, according to a new Reuters poll. And the U.S. State Department on Saturday announced it paused approvals of visitor visas for people from Gaza in order to conduct a full and thorough review of the process. This was what I was speaking related to medical care in the United States. Trump has said on social media this past week that the hostages will only return when Hamas is confronted and destroyed. The sooner that takes place, the better the chances of success, he wrote on Truth Social. This is what President Trump said. I was the one who negotiated and got hundreds of hostages freed and released into Israel and America. He also highlighted his record in international affairs. I was the one who ended 6 wars in just 6 months. I was the one who obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. Trump concluded his post with a call to take decisive action, play to win or don't play at all. Thank you for your attention to this matter, he said. I wanted to close with just a couple of updates about Christians in the Middle East. The World Evangelical Alliance announced on Sunday, the 17th of August, that it has officially appointed a CEO and Chief Executive Officer and Secretary General. Palestinian Christian from Nazareth, Boutros Mansour, has been announced. Since April 2024, the WEA has been without a CEO, and after 6 months of searching and the interview process, they announced Mansour as the new General Secretary and CEO. He said, "I'm deeply humbled by the choice and trust in me, and I am acutely aware of the immense responsibility it carries. I'm also keenly aware that this will need the hearts and minds and hands of many to join together across the global WEA family. With God's grace, I'll work relentlessly with others to remove any obstacles that might hinder our unity." The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America announced an updated position on Gaza and Palestine. This was after their church-wide General Assembly that happened in late July, where a memorial, essentially a resolution, was passed in response to the crisis in Gaza. The proposed reoccupation of Gaza City, the expulsion of almost half of Gaza's population, and response to calls from church members for this memorial. The ELCA presiding bishop issued a letter which was addressed to President Trump and to joint leadership of Congress, imploring for an end to the genocide in Gaza. Churches for Middle East Peace also put out a statement this week. There was another attack on the Ali Hospital, the Anglican hospital in Gaza. CMEP called for the safeguarding of healthcare facilities following those attacks and the attack on Ali Hospital. This was on August 19th. Saying we stand in solidarity with the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem following the horrific Israeli strike on the Ali Hospital. It took the lives of 7 people, further devastated an already collapsing healthcare system. This was right after an armed local outlaw band had entered the hospital, setting fire to the morgue and the staff prayer room, opening fire in the facility, forcing doctors, nurses, and patients to flee. Such actions desecrate a sacred space of healing, endanger the most vulnerable, and strip Gaza's people of the last remaining places of refuge. Finally, if you did not see the interview with Tucker Carlson and Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos, I'd encourage you to watch that Tucker Carlson interview. You can find it on YouTube. TRT World described the interview, talking about how an Orthodox nun has given U.S. conservatives a rare glimpse of what life is like for Palestinian Christians. She spoke about the Israeli occupation, land seizures, and armed resistance in the OPT. Mother Stephanopoulos, who's lived in the occupied West Bank town of Bethany since 1996, told Carlson's podcast that Christians face restrictions on movement, land confiscation, and violence from Israeli forces and settlers. I'd encourage you to listen to that interview. She's received quite a bit of backlash since doing it. She's also the sister of George Stephanopoulos, who was the communications director in Bill Clinton's White House in the 90s. In some ways, the video has gone viral, but there's also been quite a bit of criticism about the interview. When asked if there's any groups in the United States who are doing work advocating for Palestinian Christians, CMEP was the first group that Mother Agapia mentioned. It's another example of an interview where you can highlight this in your local media sources, write an op-ed calling attention to the key points that were raised about how Christians are leaving the Holy Land, not because of Muslim persecution, but because of occupation and the current oppressive policies being enforced against Palestinians. Might God go before us as we continue in our advocacy to end the atrocities in Gaza and all of the violence in the Middle East. In the name of Christ, amen.